The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Monday edition of the Whitfield Report. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, here at Right to Offend Media Studios. And joining me for today's episode is someone who I've been a fan of for a long time. I've actually been reading his work for about 10 years with the Mitch Rapp series. Kyle Mills is my guest for today, and I am honored to have him on the show. He's written several books, and most notably, he's well known for taking over the Mitch Rapp series after Vince Flynn passed. But now he's returning to his own established writing universe with Fade In, which is coming out at the end of this month. So I have my copy right here. And Kyle, I appreciate you sending this to me, and thanks for coming on the show. As I said, I've been a fan for a while, so it's an honor for me to talk to you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So glad to have you on. So if I may start off by just asking, what is your general background, and how did you get started in writing in the first place?
I kind of fell into it. My background is I studied economics in school and used to be a commercial banker when I was younger. I've been writing now for almost 30 years, I think. But I worked at a bank, and I was a really serious rock climber at the time, and I felt like I wanted to do something creative. And my idea was to start building furniture, but my wife pointed out that I really wasn't all that handy, and I don't think she wanted the garage full of tools. So she's the one that said, well, you like to read, so why don't you try writing a novel? I'd never studied anything like that before, though, so it seemed like a stupid idea, but I don't know, it got stuck in my head. I went out and bought a bunch of how to write a novel books, how to write a novel for dummies and stuff, and read all those and wrote a book that I never thought anybody'd read. But it ended up getting published. It became a bestseller. And I'd honestly never planned on starting writing a second book. It was just an experiment. So I ended up writing that second book, and that was a bestseller. So yeah, 25 books later or something like that. Here I am.
Yeah, I read, I went on your website last night in prep for the show and looked at your, catalog, and it's pretty extensive, even beyond the Mitch Rapp books. Had you been much of a reader prior to writing?
Oh yeah. I was a fanatical reader from probably when I was, 6 years old when I first read, learned to read, and just plowed through all kinds of books, all kinds of genres. And, but I love the thriller books. My era was kind of, I think I started my adult reading on Stephen King. I was 9 years old or something probably. And, went into Ludlum and Clancy and all these people that I really admired. So when I was thinking about what kind of book to write, as I wasn't stuck on a genre, I was just for fun. So I had loved those thriller novels, and my father had been an FBI agent, or was at the time, really, an FBI agent and the director of Interpol and the legal attaché of the United Kingdom. So I'd grown up around, the CIA and FBI and MI6 and spec ops people. And, this was before the internet, really. So it was almost
Right.
out of laziness in the sense of, wow, it'd be really easy to research because I can just call those people. If I needed to know something about the office of the director of the FBI, I'd known him for, a big portion of my life. I could just call him.
Yeah. Well, you write what you're, familiar with. At least some authors do, and so it seemed like a good fit. And you mentioned, that reading, Robert Ludlum's book, and I did see one of the books that you wrote was in the Bourne universe, if I'm
Yeah,
not
it's a Robert.
mistaken.
I wrote 3 books for the Robert Ludlum estate. They were not Bourne books, though. It's a
Okay.
little hard to tell by looking at the cover, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was a different series that followed a microbiologist, army microbiologist, um, which actually was really fun because I'm kind of a science geek. So uh, those books were really science oriented. So it wasn't really right for my brand, but it was great for the Ludlum.
Sure. What is that like, I guess, kind of as a segue, because you've obviously written your own books, and I just recently started Fade, the first book. I hadn't really read any of your books prior, you know, to the Mitch Rapp books at all. Um, but what is it like, I guess, jumping into another author's universe?
It kind of depends. It's always a different challenge. With the Ludlum stuff, that was an old series that they wanted to resurrect. It had been written by a number of authors.
Right.
Um, so there was no strong style there. I mean, other than you had the character and it was science oriented. So I was going to kind of reboot that, and I wanted to sort of set it off on an even keel. I went through the history of it and everything, really with the idea that I'd write a few. One, I didn't even know if I'd write more than one, and they'd hand it off to another author, and they'd have a good platform to work off of. I didn't worry too much stylistically about that. With Mitch Rapp, though, that was really different. I mean, Vince had died kind of at the height of his talent and popularity. He had written a book called The Last Man that sort of didn't end. He used to kind of arc his stories over
Right.
multiple books. So that was really different. I needed to emulate his style, which is really pretty different than mine, and to continue that story forward and to be very careful about maintaining the universe and the characters and all that. Now, I wrote 9 of those, so I evolved it over the years, but certainly the first book, the goal really was to just write a forgery. I wanted everybody to read that book and say, I would have never known that somebody else wrote this. It seems like Vince wrote it.
Yeah. Well, so I had uh I had just started reading Vince Flynn's books the year before you took over. I was a big fan of the show 24 when I was growing up, and so I had never read, much as far as like, on my own outside of school. But one of my friends, at the time in college, said, "Hey, my dad has been reading these Vince Flynn novels, and I've been reading them, and I think you might like them." So I had taken a gap year between high school and college, and I more or less kind of binge read the entire series, and then I got to the Last Man. It ended on a cliffhanger, and then when you took over, I think being a new fan at the time, um, I didn't really have, I guess, as many preconceived notions about, well, no one will be able to replace Vince, and I don't think anyone will, but um, for what it's worth, in my opinion, if someone had handed me the book and grayed out your name, I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference. It was really well done. I
Oh,
I
well, thank
thought
you. It was,
so.
it was interesting. It was a lot of work I had to go back and reread the entire series. It took like over 100 pages of notes and, on everything, every character, everything they'd ever done, what they wore, where they lived, really his style of writing. Right, he wrote very long action
Yeah.
sequences, which I didn't. Um, he had he wrote in very shorter sentences than I do, and all that. And I tried to stay true to all that.
How did you end up getting that job? I've read various accounts that have kind of, I guess, varied in terms of like articles, but what was there like a like one of those Mitch Rapp, like, did you submit like a fan fiction and like try out for, or did you get approached by Emily Bessler, or what
Yeah, I
happened
was
with
approached
that?
by his agent. So his agent had contacted my agent, and they were interested in where if I would want to do it. And I honestly wasn't sure. I had written 3 Ludlum books, and my thought was to go back to writing my own stuff. But I'd been a big fan of Vince's, and I honestly said, "Well, I haven't read The Last Man, so let me read it. I'm going to go out and buy it today, and I'm going to sit down, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to see if I think I can do a credible job," because I didn't want to be the guy that ruined it, right? Um, and so I read it and I thought about it, and I felt like I knew where I could go with it. So yeah, we talked about it, and they were great. I mean, they really gave me a lot of free hand, because those are hard jobs to kind of interview for. I mean, you're basically interviewing on your history, right? They
Yeah.
knew, I had written many books by, probably close to, probably 15 books at that point. And so, because it's impossible to say exactly where you're going to go, what they would like is for you to say, oh, well, this is the story I'm going to write. But that changes. I mean, it takes a year to write a book. And so I said, this is sort of the general direction I'm going, but I'm not guaranteeing I'll go that direction. And honestly, I didn't think I'd get the job, because I was really wishy-washy about committing to a storyline, because, sometimes things sound great in your head, and they put them down on paper, and they don't work. So
Yeah.
they were great. And they said, go for it, do you. Yeah, I think they were really happy with it. And the fans in the end seemed to really like the book. So, it was really gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, I mean, because I've I'm a writer myself. I've self-published, a few of my own books, and writing is not an easy process. It's not necessarily hard either if you know what you're doing and if you're passionate about your project. But I imagine there is a certain weight to taking over a beloved, franchise like the Mitch Rapp, and there must have been, at first at least, um, there must have been a feeling of, pressure that, oh, I don't want to mess this up, or, did you ever have what would Vince write in this,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
sort of,
it was kind of a big deal. I mean, it's one of the biggest thriller, series in the world. And honestly, it was one of the
yeah,
things I thought about was, do I mean, I had been pretty successful in writing, kind of a mid-list guy, which is a really good place to be. I mean, you're never going to have a private jet, but the pressure isn't huge. The demands of it aren't huge. And that was one of the questions, is, did I really want to get into something on that scale? Because I like to ski and, spend time with my wife and stuff. So,
yeah,
um, but I decided it'd be fun and interesting challenge. And yeah, there was a lot of pressure, because it's funny, when I write my own books, my goal is to write the best book I can. That's what I find fun. But that's a subjective judgment, right? I whatever, I think it's great. Maybe nobody else will. But as long as I finish a book and I think that's my best effort, I'm really happy with it. I feel like I've won. If it sells great, that's even better. If it doesn't, But with writing for something like the Mitch Rapp series, there's objective failure on the table, right? I mean, you've been hired to write in Vince's voice and write a Vince Flynn book. If everybody hates it, you failed. I mean, if everybody hates a Kyle Mills book, that was the book I wanted to write. But you could really crash and burn on something like this. And yeah, I didn't know, until it came out. You had no idea. You look at Amazon, you think I could have all 1 stars, all 5 stars. Just don't know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when you put your own work out, you hope everyone likes it, and there are obviously going to be people who don't, but it's kind of whatever. But yeah, I mean, taking over a legacy character like that is a tremendous task. I will say, I think you did a really good job with completing the story that he started out, because if I'm not mistaken, he had started writing his next book and then passed on. So the fact that you were able to complete that's not an easy task either. So
no, it's it was an interesting thing to do. I was sweating it out. I have to tell you that, because you didn't know if people even wanted it continued. Because some people just wanted it to go away, when Vince died. So you really had to come out with. I mean, I really felt like I had to come out with a really strong novel, and that would compel people to read it and to give it a chance. And in the end, truth be told, a lot of people wanted the series to continue. They wanted Vince's legacy to continue. They loved the character. Even I said the same thing. I remember my wife called me she was at work and called me one morning and was like, "Oh my God, Vince Flynn died." And I remember thinking kind of selfishly, well, I hope somebody finishes the series. Like, at least Mitch should go up in a massive explosion or retire with a lovely woman or something like that. You just didn't want it to end on a cliffhanger.
Yeah. And, meanwhile, you're nowhere in your mind are you thinking, I'm going to be the guy.
No, never. I never even crossed my mind, but I'm like, I hope they hire somebody good and just at least finish the series. Just like end it on some big note,
Yeah, I remember kind of being disappointed, because like he had passed by the time I had discovered who he was, but then I got to then and I'm like, because no one had told me that he had passed. So when I finished the book, I was like, wait, he passed, and I was like, oh man, I hope someone can finish that. So
yeah. And a lot of people felt that way. Thank God.
Yeah. So after that initial, first book, you did 9 total. So did you, I'm not sure really how to ask this, but did you ever feel like you were able to make the Mitch Rapp character your own, or, because you had a roadmap for the first, one that you wrote, sort of, but after that, you made some really interesting character choices. I felt were those things that like had been suggested to you as like an idea, or
No, I had pretty much full control over that artistically. You had a couple of problems with when I inherited that series. You had a few characters that I didn't understand, like Stan Hurley, who was still jumping through windows and stuff, but he would have been 86 or something.
Yeah.
And, another character that had been a hitman and who, his name was Louis Gould, who Mitch let off the hook, and I never really could understand why. And so I realized I was really struggling with those, and I realized, oh wait, it's my series now. I can just kill them. So I did. I killed those two characters off, and then Mitch was really angry and frustrated in The Last Man, and I thought unsustainably so. I understand why Vince wrote him that way because I'm guessing Vince was feeling the same way. So I kept him very much the same in The Survivor because it was one arc. But I didn't feel like it was sustainable, that level of intensity. So I kind of started backing off that. I gave him a girlfriend, some successes. I evolved Scott a little bit to be like kind of a little bit more of a lighthearted friend of his to bring up a
Yeah.
little of the heaviness of the story. And then I evolved it a little bit away from the straight up Islamic terrorism thing because, the world was changing. I handled that thing for 10 years and the
Yeah.
world changes really quickly. And in 10 years is like a lifetime.
Yeah. I was in college basically during your entire, run of the Mitch Rapp series. And yeah, I remember thinking even at that point that I kind of find it incredible that Vince Flynn was writing out Islamic Terror back in the, even before, uh, his first Mitch Rapp book. Like he was writing out in the, in the 90s before, generally most people knew, about, you know, Osama bin Laden or Al Qaeda or anything like that. And so, the fact that you were able to not just talk about like ISIS in some of your books, but also talk about some of the Russia stuff too, I felt was really prescient.
Yeah,
So
because he really had to. I mean, it's funny to think about like there would be people starting to read this series that don't remember 9/11 even. So, you've got new generations and the threats always change. It used to be the Soviets. It was before, my era of when I was a kid, it was the Soviet thriller.
yeah,
Um, the terrorism thing didn't start up until I was a writer. I remember writing my first book about terrorism and having to call a friend at the CIA to figure out if Al Qaeda was really the name of a group because it kind of like means the base. So, and they weren't sure at that point. So
wow,
it was a very new threat. And obviously, that went in a direction probably more in that direction than I thought it would. So you had an era of Islamic terrorism. And then now, now I kind of moved on for this partially because of that I feel like we've moved into an era that's sort of post 9/11 now. Islamic terrorism is still a threat. Is it the major threat to the United States and the world order? No. I mean, they can pick off a few of us now and then, but it's not going to be much more than that. So um, now there are new challenges to the world. A lot of them are technology, AI, Russia, China. There's, America's going through a lot of changes right now with our attitude toward the world and our place in it. And those changes are pretty fundamental and are going to cause, for better or worse, a lot of chaos. So those are things I think that are really interesting to explore now. Also the internal divisions inside the
yeah,
United States. So kind of a different, maybe that'll be the next era. I'm not sure.
yeah. Well, if I may ask a little bit about that, not to get like too political, but you've obviously studied, a lot of these subjects for your books. So, what are in your mind, the biggest? I don't want to say threats necessarily, but the biggest concerns that we're going to be looking at in the next, you know, I guess 5 to 10 years, or possibly further.
I think there are a few internal divisions within the United States, for sure. The increasing power of a few elites who control pretty much all the media that we see, and the fact that they'll be able to use AI to manipulate people. It's really unprecedented, the amount of power they have, because who would have ever thought that not Americans, everybody in the world would stare at a screen 8 hours a day, and that there would be a few companies that were able to control what you saw on that screen. So that is going to be, I think, a major threat. I also honestly think the deficit, the fact that we're, burning up money like crazy, we're going to end up collapsing the country, but there's probably no stopping that. People like money.
That's a fear of mine, and something that like I've written about, in some of my books. One of the things that's kind of interesting to me is I'm a huge James Bond fan, and the first James Bond movie I saw as a kid was Tomorrow Never Dies, which that has to do, with a big corporate media conglomerate basically trying to, basically committing acts of terror and then manipulating it for news. And at the time that came out, everyone thought it was preposterous. And I rewatched it recently, and I'm like, turns out that the most far-fetched, Bond at the time actually turned out to be pretty accurate. It's just nobody, I think was just ahead of its time as far as, people aren't using dial-up computers anymore. They're using, smartphones and whatnot. So.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and the capabilities are going to keep growing. These companies have definitely shown that they're also willing to take a knee to the government. And so, it's pretty easy to see the government getting in control of all the social media and all the normal media companies, and using AI to really target. They've already done this in experiments where, the other thing is there's never been a time, even you probably think maybe what's the most like effective police state? You think maybe East Germany with the Stasi, but it was nothing like today. I mean, they know everything you do, everything you think, all your friends, everything you buy, everywhere you go. I mean, it's all right there. I know people think, Bill Gates put a computer chip in the COVID vaccine and all that to track us, but why would he? You walk around with your phone. So it's not like their ability to know who you are and how to market to you is incredible. And now they market products, but I suspect they'll probably do, start in on ideology here pretty soon. And this is what I'm writing about. Where does that go, and can anyone control it?
Well, I'm glad that you, nice segue to, this title that you're putting out. So did you voluntarily quit the Mitch Rapp series to go back to this, or were they looking at, someone else anyway? Or?
No, I decided that 9 was enough. It was kind of one of those, I'm almost 60, and it was kind of one of those things where I thought, I don't know, for some reason, the fact that it was really getting close that I was going to write more Mitch Rapp books than Vince, that I thought, this is either going to be my career forever. I'm either going to commit to writing more books than Vince did, or I'm going to move on at this point. But and I don't know, I did a bunch of thinking, decided it was probably time to just do something different.
Yeah, well, there has to be a little more creative freedom, in writing your own, characters too, that you've, birthed in your mind, so to speak. And
I will say that the organization gave me pretty much complete freedom. I mean, if I did something crazy, they wouldn't have wanted it. But the problem is, it doesn't really have anything to do with writing for someone else. It has to do with the size of the series. So that series is so long and it's such a complex universe. Personalities are already set, all these things, that even if it had been even if I had started that series, you're trapped in it to some extent. I mean, you've got the characters are set, the universe is set, everything that's happened for the last 20 odd years is set, and you can only build on top of that. With Fade
Yeah.
In, it's kind of the idea is I could start from the foundations, push everything forward to the present day. It starts in 2025. I don't have to worry about anything that went on beyond that, but before that in the series.
So that's another question I have with Fade In is this is a sequel to a book that you wrote several years
Like
ago.
20 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was 20. I looked that up last night. Are you looking at this at Fade as I know it is a sequel, but could you read it like as a standalone?
Yeah,
book
it doesn't read like a sequel really at all. I mean, that was the goal. I mean, you can't really write a sequel to a book you wrote 20 years ago, but Fade was a character that I really loved, my fans really loved. I still get emails 20 years later. I was still getting emails about it. And he seemed like the right character for the time, for modern times, which is why I wanted to resurrect him. But no, if you wanted to go back and read the first book, it would read probably like a prequel. It doesn't have anything to do with the themes that I'm dealing with now or his life now. It was very much about him and some personal grudges that he had back in the day.
Interesting. Do you ever go back and read your own work just for the heck of it? I know some authors do, and I know others don't. I've heard several say that once it's written, you never look at the book again.
Yeah, the first book of mine that I ever read was Fade. And it was because it was so long ago, I couldn't remember all the stuff that happened in it. So I had to go through, like I did the Mitch Rapp series, read the book, take a bunch of notes about, his history, what he looked like, how old he was, all these things. But yeah, that was the first time I had ever gone back and read one of my books. And it'll be interesting to see if I ever do it again. I don't know why.
Yeah. What's it like as an author seeing your name on a bookshelf in stores? Is that still surreal for you, or was it ever?
Yeah, I mean, my first book, for sure. I mean, yeah, the whole getting your first book. I mean, I remember when that arrived in there was an actual book form, and it looked real. And I opened that up, and yeah, that was a crazy feeling because I was writing before the indie thing, really took off.
Yeah.
So that like a self-published book was kind of a rare thing. It was really before ebook. It wasn't a good way to do well as a self-published author. Really, really difficult. So yeah, it was crazy. I mean, that was a really surreal thing for me because I had written the book. I had gotten a big deal. I mean, there were a couple of companies publishing houses bidding for me. They gave me a 2-book deal, and what do they call it? Imposter syndrome. I thought,
yeah,
one of these guys is going to find out I'm not a writer. I mean, I work at a bank. I've never written anything before in my life. And then everybody's looking to you for writing expertise and stuff. And I thought, I don't know any of this stuff. I got it all from writing, novel writings for dummies. And so it took years before I kind of felt like I've probably written 5 books or something before I actually started thinking, yeah, I'm kind of a writer now. I mean, I was doing it professionally for years before I felt like, so I went to a writer's conference or something and people talked to me like I knew what I was doing. I didn't feel really weird about it. But
Yeah.
it's great. It's great to go into like a Barnes and Noble and see your books sitting there on the front table. Like that never gets old.
I'm sure it does. It doesn't. Has anyone recognized you
It's like
at all?
happened to, I mean, obviously if I go to writers conference, yes, but like it's only happened to me a
Yeah.
couple of times in the street, and it's really startling because you don't think you're an author. Like who would recognize you?
Right.
And I didn't have to worry about that with the Vince Flynn stuff because Vince's picture was on the back, not mine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose that helps kind of with, keeping a low profile too.
Yeah, which is my preference, really. It would be hard to be just a huge author that are there really even any? I mean, you always honestly have to have a really unique look for anybody to notice, right? Like Stephen King, if he walked into a room, Lee Child, like a couple of those guys, you'd really notice. But
Yeah.
I bet if Dan Brown or whatever Tom Clancy had walked into a room, nobody would ever know.
Well, I've interviewed, I interview a lot of indie authors, and I've interviewed, a couple of traditionally published authors like yourself, and I get asked about, interviewing, authors all the time. And I tell people it's like interviewing someone who is just a normal person. I tend to kind of experience, at least, that there's really no ego, at least with authors, like there are, movie stars or other celebrities, which I find that, you know, I like that, and I find that, comforting
Yeah, I
somewhat.
think if you're certainly if you're in the movies, you probably got into that with the idea of being famous, and it's something you wanted. I can't imagine there's ever been anybody who's ever written a novel with the purpose of becoming famous. If so, I'm sure they're very disappointed. Um, we write because yeah, we love it, and it's something you
Yeah.
do, like I do sitting in my basement. it's it's not that glamorous, really.
Yeah, I started writing, short stories back in high school, that I didn't think anyone was going to read, simply because, I loved the spy thriller genre. And then after college, I took a bunch of those, and, I made a novella out of one of them, and I was surprised that it sold as well as it did.
Yeah,
Now, it's given me the opportunity to talk to authors such as yourself, and it's been a great gig. So,
it's fun. I mean, it's funny to look back and think, what else would I have done with my life? I mean, I don't think I'd have stayed in banking, and this has been a perfect job for me, though it's
yeah,
honestly not for everybody because I had a friend that was a writer and he was successful at it, and he ended up leaving it because it's pretty solitary.
yeah,
If you're a really social person, or you need to be out there, have constant feedback and stuff like that, this is not the job for you.
no, I mean, I think, and that's something that, like, a lot of people don't understand. It's like I'm a homebody, and yeah, I have a social life somewhat. But I'm perfectly fine, also just living in my imagination, which is 90% of the time what we do as
Yeah,
writers.
yeah, and I've always been
So,
okay, being on my own. So
yeah. So you've got Fade In. Uh, do you think, do you have other projects that you're, working on, as far as like other series, or,
no, I'm just finished the first draft of the next book in the Fade series. I'm a guy who can only do one book a year, which used to be normal, but now it's really not so much anymore. People write 2, 3 books a year, or they write their own book and they write for another series or whatever. That would never work for me. Like during the entire
yeah,
Mitch Rapp thing gig, I never wrote one of my own books. I only focused entirely on the Mitch Rapp stuff.
What's the biggest? What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen? Because you mentioned you've been doing this for close to 30 years. So I guess what are the most, I guess, noticeable changes that you've seen in the publishing world for as long as you've been in?
Well, there's a couple of things there. I mean, as far as like writing, the actual writing of books goes, the fans have changed. I mean, 30 years is a long time, right? I mean, people read my books that weren't born when I started. So for sure, books were much longer when I started. I mean, I think I remember my first contract, I think it said 120,000 words, and now, yeah, they'd be quite a bit, like more like 190 or even shorter. People's attention spans have gotten shorter. I would also say that people read them from a much stronger political point of view. And then, so probably an easy way to put that is people are more easily offended than they used to be. So if you're telling a story from even two different sides, if you have a villain even who makes a good point, maybe a good political point or something, people are really offended by that, and they tend to put it off on the author. And you're like, no, I'm writing a character. These are not necessarily my beliefs. Like, I write a terrorist. It doesn't mean I want to blow up, a bunch of people at a concert, right, or whatever. So that's something you have to decide whether you want to navigate or not. I've never worried about it too much.
Yeah, I always kind of with that sort of thing. Because I've written, obviously I'm in the thriller genre as well, so it's kind of hard to avoid some political characters, and with that type of thing, like my president character in my book, who's president of the United States, I specifically say that he's the first president who got elected who is an independent candidate, and yet people still want to label him as, oh, he's he's a Trumpian type character, or he's this or that, and I'm kind of like, well, I guess he's a Rorschach type character. Then he's whatever the reader is going to kind of see whatever they want to see with certain characters.
Yeah,
I guess
there's an old saying: no two people have ever read the same book, and that's absolutely true. I mean, my goal is to, if I get somebody from the left that's really mad about the book and somebody from the right that's really mad about the book, I feel like I've done my job, And I think because of the type of book I write, I mean, this isn't true of the Mitch Rapp stuff, which is very much good versus evil stories. I'm much more interested in the gray, but between good and evil.
Yeah.
So, I mean, somebody commented in Fade In, they were like, well, when I started, I thought this guy was the villain. And then by the end, I wasn't sure he might be the good guy, So, because I think that's the way the world really is. It's hard to label good and evil. Everybody has their own perspective. So I think that's fun to play with.
Well, and also, too, you were mentioning kind of the internal, division in this country that has been a huge problem. I agree with you. Specifically, kind of one of the things that kind of drives me crazy is, even in my lifetime, and I'm only 30, there seems to be this whole obsession with, is someone conservative, or are they are they on the right, or are they on the left? And I would say I'm more conservative in some areas, but there are other areas where I guess one might say I'm more liberal, and too, and it's kind of like, well, why are people so? It's so mind-boggling to me now that, like, even in, like, movies and whatnot, people are so anxious to label things as one way or the other, and it's kind of like, well, why why can't we look at characters and people, as like a whole thing as opposed to just being left or right? It's weird.
Which creates you have to do that to create a rich, believable character, I think, because like you say,
Yeah.
everybody has certain belief systems. Having said that, I think humans evolved to break themselves into tribes, and
Yeah.
we do it all the time. So rich, poor, black, white, left, right, Christian, Muslim. I mean, we need a tribe. It gives us our identity. And, that's just I think it's become more intense over the last 30 years. I mean, when I started, I wouldn't say I gave much thought to like Democrat or Republican, or like it wasn't really that. There certainly was animosity between the two groups, but it was much more, I mean, the Reagan era, I think when I was in college, it was much more over policy. Reagan was going to do X. And so the left were against that. It wasn't so much that they thought he was a bad guy. I mean, I think people liked him. But they were very opposed to whatever he was doing. So now it's much more, particularly now, I think it's much less this policy versus that policy makes you a conservative. It's more who you are aligned with. If you're aligned with Trump and he does something liberal, then, you're going to, I mean, his personal life, I would say, is kind of liberal, right? It's a little more like Clinton than, Reagan. So, but on the other hand, if you're going to agree with him because that's your tribal leader. Same thing with Biden. I mean, when Biden was really against think about something maybe conservative he did, he was really opposed to the defund the police movement. So but people are going to buy into that because he's their leader and maybe they're for it. So I think that's become a much more stronger, the identity of it all. And that's a hard thing to deal with in a book because, if your character is the hero and he says things that oppose that person's views, they don't see it as an opposition to their view. They see it as an opposition to who they are.
Right.
And that's the fundamental difference. If I said my character is pro-choice and you aren't, 30 years ago, you'd have said, well, I disagree with that position. But now you'd say that person is the enemy to who I am and my values and my beliefs. And so that becomes a little bit more challenging. Like I said, you have to decide how you want to navigate it. Do you want to tiptoe through that, or do you just want to be the bull in the china shop? And I've kind of decided might as well just be the bull in the china shop.
Yeah, I've kind of taken the same, route. I'm kind of like, look, I'm not trying to intentionally offend anyone with my, writing or with my podcast, but if you are, you are, and there's not much I can do other than just say, hey, this if this is the type of book I'm writing or the type of podcast we're doing. So
yeah, I mean, my character Fade is like, I mean, he's kind of a kooky guy. I mean, his experience was being in the military and the CIA and kind of getting screwed over by the US government. And that's colored his view of the government, the military, the CIA. But that's his experience. You're reading that book through, not entirely through his eyes, but sometimes through his eyes, sometimes through the eyes of other people. And it gives you those perspectives, which is, the definition of empathy, and it's something I think Americans have lost. The idea of, can you put yourself in someone else's shoes? And I've been lucky enough to live all over the world, and I'm actually a legal resident of Spain and live there half time. And so, for instance, as a good example, I am an immigrant, not in the United States, but when I'm in Spain. And so my perspective when people talk about immigrants in the United States is really different, because all the things these immigrants are experiencing, sitting, in immigration with all their files, like really nervous, sitting and waiting to hear, if you're going to get renewed or if you're going to get your residency or, all these things, dealing with a foreign language all the time, all these things I experience day to day. And that's one of the things I love about writing is you get to experience things from completely different points of view. If you write a bad guy who's a terrorist, you have to think, why is this guy a terrorist? Like, what's the history?
Yeah.
He's an Iranian. What's the history of America and Iran? Why do they hate us? How am I going to motivate this guy? Because to me, just being like, oh, guy, he's death to America, he's mad at America, whatever, is boring. Like, I want to know why that guy's mad at America. And then, maybe you find out, oh, well, he's got a good point there.
Yeah. Well, it's like, even like, I guess the term deep state is kind of, it's kind of, kind of thrown around now. But, in one of my plots, like I have a secret society group that kind of, I guess, runs a shadow, government organization within the U.S. And I've always been fascinated with that, like, with that whole conspiracy theory. But I approach it from, okay, if there was a shadow government, why would they exist?
And
Other
would it be a
than,
good thing or a bad thing? Maybe it has some
yeah,
positives, right?
yeah. Even if they do bad things, do they have? I don't want to say good intentions, to the rest of us, but maybe in their mind, they think what they're doing is, they might be doing bad things, but they, in their mind, they're doing these bad things for the greater good. That time.
I mean, the truth is everybody, the old saying, everybody's the hero of their own book. So,
yeah.
Every villain feels justified in what they do. So and that's a fun thing to explore. It's fun to read. It's fun to write women characters. You got to sit there and think about the world from a woman's point of views or minority characters. I mean, Fade, his real name is, Salam Al-Fayed. So he grew up to Syrian immigrant families and as an Arab, and joined the military and went to war. But that's a very different perspective, right? He grew up in an Arab family. He speaks, fluent Arabic, and he sees Afghanistan, for instance, differently than like I would if I was, going into the military.
Do you ever like talk to people kind of to do character research or, I guess base characters off of people that you've met or things like?
Yeah, mostly
that?
off people I've met. Like I said, I've been lucky enough to know a lot of, a lot of operatives and intelligence people over my life. I grew up with them.
Yeah.
I also interestingly lived in London and lived in a very Arab neighborhood and made a lot of Arab friends. So, Salam Al-Fayed, I felt a little bit more qualified to do that. While he's not religious, and most of my friends were quite, very Muslim.
Yeah.
It is a different perspective, and it was really gratifying. I had a guy who has that background read this book and said that he was that I'd done a good job in sort of creating as a white guy, creating a person that has seen discrimination and has been kind of, when he was in the military, people were not quite so sure about him because he's Arab, and could get along really well in that world. And I wanted to portray that a little bit because, particularly being a white male in America, your life is pretty, I don't know, it goes along pretty smoothly. And you don't really know what women deal with every day, what minorities deal with every day, what immigrants deal with every day. And it's easy to say they're overblowing it or it's not real or whatever, but a lot of it is. So it's fun to see the world from those perspectives.
Yeah, and it's also like I talk to lots of veterans all because a couple of my characters are veterans that have gone into private military contracting, and so I always like to kind of bounce, rough drafts off of some of them and being like, is this accurate? How would this character handle this type of situation realistically? And some of them are like, yeah, this would nail it. Or, sometimes like, yeah, this is the way the character would do it, but this would be extremely boring for the reader to read it this way. So, maybe do it something like this. So
Yeah, you don't want to get overly realistic. I mean, you think about the government, it's all sitting around in meetings. It's more meetings than it is gunning people down in the streets of Istanbul.
yeah, that's for sure. Well, yeah, well, I'm really excited, for Fade In to, hit shelves. It seems like this is a great return to the series. I haven't started reading this yet because I just got it. I just got back from a vacation last night, so I just opened this. But I'm looking forward to reading it, and I'm looking forward to also seeing what you have planned in the future. So,
Well, I hope you enjoy it.
yeah, I appreciate it. So, where can people find you and connect with you?
So it's Kyle Mills Author, and that's on all the like Facebook, Instagram, X, and then just kylemills.com if you want to check out my website. Lots of information about the books and all that there.
That's awesome. And you also, it seems like you're with a new publishing imprint as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, it has Authors Equity. It has been an interesting journey. They're new and run by a bunch of people that came out of the traditional publishing world, and trying to do something a little different, which has been a lot of fun. I've wanted to do. I mean, I guess when I left the Mitch Rapp thing, I wanted to have some fun, do something different, be a little bit exciting to go back out on your own. And they're a really terrific publisher, and you get to be in on a lot of the decision making and stuff. So, kind of fun and different, which was what I was going for, something unique.
What's kind of, if I may ask, what's your take on, the advent kind of self-publishing? Because to me, it kind of seems like, even like 10 years ago, self-publishing was kind of, people turned their nose up at it. And now it seems a lot more, I guess accepted.
Yeah,
than it
for
was
sure. Yeah.
even.
The weird thing about it is it almost feels like the two are merging, because publishing has changed. The traditional publishing has changed a lot since I've been involved in it. And there's not, because of the way things have gone with Amazon, with changes at Barnes and Noble, with the indie bookstores, there's not as much that a publisher can do for you as they used to be able to. So, I mean, a publisher when I started could manufacture a bestseller. They'd get a book and they're like, we love this book, we love this author. I mean, to some extent that happened to me by accident. With my first book, they were going to put a lot behind a book that was coming out, and the author couldn't get it done. And they had this slot where they had, bought all the ad space and done all this stuff. And I happened to be standing there, which is funny because, they were like, does anybody have a thriller that's basically done and doesn't need a lot of editing? And my editor said, I do. I just got this thing. And so they stuck it in that slot. And it got a lot of promotion. It got up front in all the bookstores, got ad space that doesn't even exist anymore. So in print. And so that can't be done anymore. So to a large extent, the author is on the hook for a lot of the publicity. We have social media now and all this stuff. And they can't ram these books down booksellers' throats anymore like they used to be able to. So it's a little, and that's a little bit with my publisher, is acknowledging that It's more of a partnership now than it used to be. When I started out, I didn't really have any say at all in marketing.
And do you find that to be a positive generally, or I wouldn't even say like a negative, but I mean, I guess is there anything that you really miss, I guess, from the old publishing?
Well, it's a lot more work. So,
Yeah.
I never really marketed my books. I mean, in the beginning, you really couldn't. How would you? Like, you couldn't, never met fans other than on tour, couldn't talk to them. So it's a lot more work, and it's a question of whether that's something you love doing. It's a lot more creative. It's more of a creative process for the author. So no different than what an indie author does. You've got to get out there and market your book. It's just I have a lot more support.
Yeah.
But it's, a lot of people who are good at that. I mean, I think of like a Jack Carr, who is just really good at marketing, publicity, and managing that world while still writing, really good books. But, that guy must work 18 hours a day.
Yeah. It's funny because, while you were writing the Mitch Rapp series, he kind of came along and, blew the hinges off the door, at least for, people my age who, are like, I'm 30, but like, I know people who are in their 20s now who are, like Jack Carr is the way that Vince Flynn was for me and that Tom Clancy might have been for, my dad. So it's interesting. And yeah, I mean, he has an incredible work ethic. And I mean, a lot of authors do, yourself included. So
mine's not like that, though. I got to tell you, I mean, I can be a little bit lazy. I like to do one book a year. And the idea of doing that much publicity, man, it would be hard. He's definitely tireless, but he's also made some changes. I don't know that he's made changes because I think he's really unique in his ability to do what he does. I mean, you look at him now and you think, is he an author? Is he more like, he's also like a lifestyle brand? He's kind of an influencer. Like, he's been able to take the entire modern media system that no other author has been able to really charge at it in all those different directions. And he's kind of maybe the first of a new generation that understands that writing your book is one facet of your multifaceted empire, And so
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see if other people, younger people who are much more savvy about this than I am, can and want to or can replicate it. It wouldn't be easy to replicate.
no, I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not easy to replicate. Just from just kind of from my experience, like I have my book series, and I have friends who are already like, well, when are you going to turn this into a movie? And I'm like, that's a whole other wheelhouse. Like I've written, because I took some film studies classes in college. I've written screenplays, which is that's an entirely different beast from writing novels. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I'd love to do that, but I just don't have the resources as one man, to do.
Yeah, that's really different. I mean, I've been offered jobs like that, and I've never done it because I like writing novels. I like movies, but I like books better. I like the medium better. And
yeah,
so it's not something I've ever really pursued. Someday it'd be fun to write a screenplay, maybe. But I don't know. I really like novel length fiction.
yeah, as do I. Well, sir, I mean, I know we're up on on an hour, so I want to thank you for your time, and like I said, it's an honor to meet you. Been a big fan for a while. To finally get to talk to you is a huge honor of mine.
Well, thanks. So, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Likewise. So And folks, we'll be back, or I'll be back on the next episode. And until then, thanks for tuning in. And I'll link Kyle's social media and his website. And I really encourage you all to check out this book and check out his other books as well. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.